Reports indicate that Jose Quintana is likely out of the Mets rotation for at least 3 months, which means you're probably not going to see the left-hander for the entire first half. In spring training, Tylor Megill and David Peterson are once again competing head-to-head to grab that last spot in the rotation. Who will ultimately end up landing the job? We'll be discussing that on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Baseball GM. Have you ever dreamed of being an MLB GM and managing your baseball franchise? Then this is definitely the game for you. To download the game, just visit ultimatebaseball.com or look it up on app stores. Our listeners get an 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDON in all caps in the game. Let's talk about some GM decisions the Mets have to make right now, as Jose Quintana is out for a very long time. The Mets are not going to have their left-handed starter as he is dealing with that stretch fracture in his ribs. They are saying that it might take 3 months of rest before he can start a throwing program, before he can get ready to go. And that could mean the All-Star break, and at times, injuries like this, where that's the initial timetable, suddenly there's a setback. And, as he tried to get back, there's a forearm issue. And look, I'm not saying that Quintana's done for the season, because there's every chance that he's back in the second half and is playing a big role. But when you have a guy who's going to be out for months, you're almost just out of sight, out of mind on him. And that leads to opportunities for other guys. And we assumed, and at least by we I'm meaning myself and others, that David Peterson was going to grab that last spot in the rotation. Adds another lefty into the mix, a guy that really earned it with the way he pitched last year. But some reports, according to Mike Puma in the New York Post, says that might not actually be the case, because they're saying Tylor Megill is a guy that intrigues the Mets, and they point towards his stats in April last year where he pitched to the sub-2 ERA and looked like a Jacob deGrom out there replacing an injured Jacob deGrom. He was unbelievable. Maybe they think that he's that guy, and that's more dynamic, more of a weapon than a guy like David Peterson. Then again, I'll point to the fact that Peterson strikes out more batters than Megill and wonder if that's actually the case. But it is interesting to see some form of a vote of confidence heading towards Megill's way. He had a really nice outing today in spring. My dad was actually in attendance, told me Megill looked great. Look at the stats from the game. 4 innings pitched, 3 hits allowed, walked 1, struck out 3. That cut his ERA to 1.08 in camp. He allowed 1 earned run in his first appearance, and his last 2 has gone 6 1/3 without allowing a run. So you say, wow, Tylor Megill looking great out there in spring. David Peterson hasn't given up a run yet, though. That's the thing that confuses me about why there might be more of a vote of confidence going Megill's way. He has had less work, 4 innings. He had 2 starts. Or 2 games pitched, I should say. 1 was a start, 1 was a relief appearance. But he has not a lot of hit in those 4 innings. So I don't think that Peterson has done anything to cost himself this job. Megill has gotten in front of the Mets brass a little bit more. Megill might be a little more stretched out at this stage of the game, and that could be important for the Mets. It is a curious thing, though, to see the Mets potentially looking at Megill over Peterson, when Peterson is the guy that was healthy last year and I think really showed you an ability to take this job and run with it, whereas Megill has given you flashes. But again, I look at what he has done, his 2 seasons, 137 innings of big league pitching for Tylor Megill, It's a 4.73 ERA. He's had a good month each season. The month of July in 2021, he was awesome. The month of April in 2022, he was awesome. Do the Mets really believe that he is that guy and he could put that together for a full year? That could be where they're leaning. Maybe they really do believe in that upside play. And they think that David Peterson is simply the answer because, he is the guy that maybe they view as having frontline stuff because he's had little pockets where he's looked like that type of a pitcher. Then again, he's sitting 92, 93 in camp. When he's been at his best, the velo has been higher than that. Is he going to be able to be as effective at a lower velocity? And the reason he is throwing at a lesser velocity is, Max Scherzer's been talking to him about changing speeds. He's working a curveball into his repertoire right now. And the idea that if you can hold on to some of that velo, if you can hold back a little bit and not empty the tank early, maybe he can go deeper in starts, and he's not a guy that's 2 times through the lineup and done, that can make it beyond 85 pitches and be strong through 100. I like both of these guys. I really do. To me, David Peterson is the better pitcher. He has shown more. He has a season last year that is a bigger sample size of success than anything I have gotten the chance to see with Tylor Megill, and I do like having a left-handed starter in this rotation. But maybe it's the fact that Tylor Megill is the better, more malleable pitcher that it could ultimately be what hurts him. And maybe the Mets are looking at Megill as a guy that's not as flexible for the Trevor Williams-esque role. And maybe that is where they would potentially lean Megill so that Peterson could play that pivotal swingman role. And maybe because he did a little bit of that last year, they feel more confident in his ability to step into that position again in 2023. We're going to discuss that in just a minute. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Pro Baseball GM. This is so much fun if you're a baseball nerd like myself. I'll tell you, I was always the guy on MLB The Show, or if even I was playing Madden or NBA 2K, whatever it is. I'm always the guy that likes building my team just as much as playing as my team. I've always dreamed about becoming an MLB GM one day. If you're like me and you always wanted to manage a professional baseball franchise, now is your chance. That dream can come true, and this game is definitely for you. You're going to manage every strategic aspect of your team. You can play through the season, lead your team to glory. You're responsible for hiring the right coaches and staff, managing your team's finances, scouting and drafting players, managing the difficult personalities, navigating your franchise through free agency, and all the ups and downs of the season. All of this in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Baseball GM is completely free and playable offline, so you can play it on the go, take it wherever you want. This is a game that you could just pull out your phone and have a blast with. You don't even need Wi-Fi. After you download, you're free to go. You can just play this game. If you've got a long flight, Ultimate Pro Baseball GM is there for you. Locked On Mets listeners will get 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On. Make sure you write that in all caps in the game store. Make sure you check this out, or you can download the game by visiting probaseballgm.com and scan the code or look it up on app stores. If you're watching on YouTube, that code is on the screen. You can scan that, or again, go to probaseballgm.com. Check out the Ultimate Baseball GM game. Start your dynasty today. Last year, David Peterson pitched to a 3.68 ERA out of the bullpen in 14 2/3 innings pitched. Is there a chance the Mets are looking at Peterson and saying, as much as we love you in the rotation, we got Brooks Raley banged up, so one of your lefties is down. Maybe you look at Peterson as a guy with that slider, with the strikeouts he put up last year, that could thrive in a bullpen role, where he can go up, empty the tank in 2 to 3 inning spurts, and be a weapon for you. And Tylor Megill is a pitcher that you thought would play up out of the bullpen, but looked terrible in that role down the stretch last year, who you're just thinking, either we're going to put Megill in Syracuse or we're going to put him as part of our big league rotation. Peterson's going to be a major leaguer either way. Maybe that is the mindset. And if you want both of these arms as part of your bullpen, that could potentially be where the scales could be tipped in Megill's favor. I would still personally bet on Peterson as the guy that will win this job because I think he is the better pitcher. And ultimately, you should put the better pitcher in the rotation. I think Tylor Megill is a good arm. He has shown the ability to get out at the big league level and has shown the ability to be able to be a dominant pitcher over stretches, but he's yet to put it all together. He's yet to show me that curveball is a real offering for him. And a guy that was always supposed to be predicated off the fastball, his slider and his changeup have been a little inconsistent early on in his big league career. So can he find that consistency in his secondaries to play on with that fastball, to work off of it and be able to have success? He was talking to the reporters today about this curveball is working in, how it gives him another pitch he can use to steal strikes. It also could allow him to work that fastball more effectively up in the zone. I think there were times last year where batters saw Tylor Megill and they knew if the pitch was kind of lower in the zone, it was slider or changeup, so they were sitting more off speed. Anything up, they could sit fastball and try to drive it. And maybe that's the case where your slider or your changeup for him wasn't dropping vertically in that way. So now by having a curveball that's changing eye levels, that's making you think a little bit, where he can drop that curveball where it starts at the top of the zone, he buries it at the bottom of the zone. Batters might swing through it, then all of a sudden they're thinking curveball, and he can throw that heater up in the zone and get some swings and misses that way. I think Megill is a pitcher that still has to really find himself. There's more work that has to be done with him, whereas Peterson is a more finished product. But I do understand potentially the way the Mets are leaning here as it relates to Peterson being more suited to come out of the pen than Megill. And if you want to have both of them on your roster, maybe that's how you squeeze it in, and you just basically understand that whenever you have to call on Peterson, there's going to be a point in the season where you're going to need both of these guys coming out of the rotation. If I had to set the over-under on combined starts for Tylor Megill and David Peterson, I'd put it at 25, and with Quintana out this long, I'd probably take the over on that. And there's every chance that these guys make up some combination of the fifth starter spot for the rest of the year. And honestly, if I set the over-under at 30, the more I think about it, the more I could see it happening, right? Where, if Quintana doesn't come back, or even if he does, and there's other stretches in the first half where you're getting starts where both of them are taking turns in the rotation, you could see whoever doesn't make it in that rotation get up to 10 starts, and whoever does could solidify a spot in that rotation and make 25. All of a sudden, you're getting a ton of starts from those two guys. So I think regardless of the decision the Mets make here, we're going to see a lot of both of these pitchers. They're going to be a big part of this team. It's just trying to understand how much of a role they're going to play and who's going to get that opportunity first. It was interesting, though, to read Mike Puma's report in there. The Mets are intrigued by Megill. I don't know if that is just kind of a cop-out report where, the Mets are intrigued by both Peterson and Megill because it's their own pitchers that they think highly of, which would not necessarily be pointing towards Megill over a Peterson. The way it was written in that story, though, it does make it seem like the Mets were potentially favoring Megill over Peterson. And if that's the case, I think that Peterson would still be part of that bullpen where, again, I think if the job goes to Peterson, Megill is probably going to end up in AAA. So it's some tough decisions the Mets have to make. Both these guys have thrown the ball well so far. They got, 2 more full weeks, a little bit beyond that to get ready before the first series against the Marlins, which begins on, March 30th? I believe, Thursday, March 30th. So you're looking at what? If you're listening to this on Tuesday, you got 2 weeks and 16 days, something like that, until opening day. So you got to make these decisions sooner rather than later, and I'll be fascinated to see where the Mets ultimately decide to go. With all that said, there's another pitcher in camp who hasn't gotten talked about at all, really. Guy that's guaranteed a spot in the rotation, Carlos Carrasco. We're going to discuss him in just a minute, set some expectations for a season. Before we get to that, though, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point in the NBA season has passed. Now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, ahead of the NBA playoffs, because new customers will get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, it's secure, it's super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything, from the money line to the spread to point scores to three-pointers drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. I have my eyes on MLB futures right now as well, where you can find Brett Beatty and Kodai Senga for the Rookie of the Year. Francisco Alvarez is on that as well. MVP voting, Lindor, Alonso, names to watch, Cy Young, Verlander, Scherzer, all of that good stuff can be found over at FanDuel. Don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 and bonus bets back when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment matter more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Yeah, at times we can forget about Carlos Carrasco being part of this rotation because he's just not the biggest name here. He kind of fits somewhere in the middle where you have the top of the rotation with Verlander and Scherzer and now Senga that are grabbing most of the headlines. And the back of the rotation is where there's the competition. Carrasco has a spot here, but doesn't get talked about much. Looking at what he did last year, again, 152 innings pitched over 29 starts, 3.97 ERA. You look at his expected fielding independent pitching, it's at 3.45. That is the xFIP on him. His FIP, his fielding independent pitching, is 3.53. So that's telling you he's maybe a little bit misfortunate with potentially some of the home runs he gave up. That's also potentially some defense that came back to haunt him a little bit. His left on base percentage was 74.7% last year. You look at his best seasons, it's a little bit better than that. So I don't know if maybe some runners he should be stranding ended up coming across last year, whether it was due to errors or whether it was just, some bad luck on his part where some soft hit balls were snaking through, and that ultimately led to that discrepancy between his ERA and his expected fielding independent pitching or his fielding independent pitching. But what he does for you, he doesn't walk a lot of batters. 2.43 walks per 9 last season, 2.36 for his career. He usually keeps the ball in the yard. Last year, 1.01 home runs per 9. So if you're giving up a home run every 9 innings, that's not bad. He actually struck out 9 batters per 9 last year. So this is a durable, consistent starting pitcher. I know he ran into injuries in 2021. You can't blame what happened to him in 2019 because against him as far as not getting on the mound because that was due to cancer. He has found a way throughout his career to be a dependable starting pitcher, though. And you look at the guy that he was, prior to the cancer diagnosis in 2015, 30 starts, 2016, 25 starts, 2017, 32 starts, pitched in 32 games, 30 starts in 2018, 192 innings pitched. Comes out of everything that he went through in 2019 to make all 12 starts, be unbelievable in that shortened season, 68 games. And then he had the really bad hamstring injury, if I'm not mistaken. Pulled that muscle in spring. Is very similar to what we just saw with Quintana in his first year with the Mets back then for Carrasco, this year with Quintana. He didn't get to see him, and when you did see him down the stretch, he wasn't great. Last year was a healthy Carrasco season. Went 15-7. I know we don't care about records anymore, but if you watch those games, he kept the Mets in the game when he started. So I think Carlos Carrasco is a guy that, he's not going to be discussed much going into the season. The conversation right now is more on, what's Senga going to be? Wow, you got Verlander, Scherzer. Who's going to grab that last spot? Peterson, Megill. And here's Carlos Carrasco, your number 4 starter, who I expect this season to be taking the ball every 5th day, to be giving you 5 to 7 innings anytime out. He's usually not going to get the hook before that 5th, and that's going to be big for you. And there's times where he's going to have it. He's going to keep that pitch count low, and with the pitch clock even, I could see Carrasco getting into a rhythm at times where he's just pitching to contact and getting his soft fly balls and getting some grounders. And you look up and it's going to be 75 minutes into the game, and Carlos Carrasco is going to be holding on to a 3-1 lead. It's going to be the bottom of the 7th inning, and he's going to be sitting at 84 pitches. I'm like, wow, what Carrasco did tonight. It's good to have him. It really is. The Mets need as much depth as they can. As exciting as that competition is at the back end of the rotation with Peterson, Megill, who's going to grab that spot, who's going to show up and perform more in the final few weeks here. A guy like Carrasco is just getting stretched out, getting ready. His last outing got himself up to 52 pitches, 35 of them from strikes, 4 innings pitched. Figure he can get himself up to, maybe 65, 70 pitches the next time around, and a couple more starts in there, and he might be one of the more stretched out, ready to go arms in camp. I think it's great to have veterans like Carrasco, Verlander, Scherzer that know how to get themselves ready for a season, particularly when you have some question marks, not only with Quintana's injury, but a guy like Sanko's doing it for the first time, and young pitchers who are still trying to establish themselves in Peterson and Megill. No matter how the Mets line up that rotation, though, it is going to be great, I believe, 1 through 5 throughout a majority of this season. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On Fantasy Baseball to get yourself ready for all of your fantasy leagues. It is drafting season. They have you covered to make sure you don't make any mistakes in your league this year. Follow Locked On Fantasy Baseball wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.